Enjoy with your headphones for a better listening experience.
Please watch till the end of the video to have the most scariest part of the story.
What crazy and weird stories do you need to tell? Episode 4. My experience last week. My friend and I have been attempting to go to a certain bar for close to 6 years, and every single time something has come up or the plan has changed to go somewhere else. We were finally like, okay, we're doing this tonight. I called to confirm the bar was open, really severe weather where I am, and the person said yes. We get there only to find the door locked. I called the number back and we could hear the phone ringing inside. No one answers. I tried calling again and nothing. We started ordering a cab to go elsewhere, but I decided to try calling one last time. Someone answers and says the bar is open. I tell them we are outside, and the door is locked. A person hangs up. I called back and no one answered. My friend then calls and again someone answers and says they are open. We asked them to come unlock the door then. Finally, after several more minutes, a small window in the door slides open. A person stares at us for a few minutes and then unlocks the door to let us in. He then locks it behind us. There are only 4 people in the bar, all Polish men in their mid-40s who do not speak any English. They seem irritated we are there. Bartender appears from somewhere deep and recesses a bar. We offer to leave, and she says no. She makes us a drink. We are convinced we are going to be taken out in a mob hit or end up in some sort of hostel/saw bar themed situation. Friend is crazy and uses restroom. Restroom is covered. Men turn on loud Polish rap music, who even knew that was a thing, and then when we finish our drink they unlock door and allow us to leave. Overall, a weird/terrifying experience. Well, not as crazy as some of the other stories here, but I enjoy telling this story when someone complains to me about their flight being delayed. It was the winter break of 2015. I was an international student in the US, Iowa to be specific, and was traveling back to Malaysia for about a month. The flight was supposed to be from Iowa, Texas, Hong Kong, Malaysia. Iowa to Texas flight was scheduled for 9 a.m. I stayed about a half hour from the airport, but I like to leave early in case things went wrong, so I left home at 7 a.m., and boy, did things go wrong. About 10 miles away from the airport, my roommates, who so kindly gave me a lift, car's driveshaft broke in two. All I heard was the sound of metal breaking and scraping against the road and my roommate screaming. So, I was stranded at the side of the freeway. I tried calling a cab, but they didn't stop for people by the side of the freeway. They required an address. So, I bade my roommate goodbye and walked uphill for 2 miles with a huge suitcase to the nearest gas station. Got a cab, made it to the airport and through the check-in, TSA, and got on the plane with probably 10 minutes to spare. So off I went to Texas. When arriving at DFW, captain of the plane told the passengers that he had to circle the airport and could not land because there were not 1, but 2 tornadoes nearby. We circled for about 30 minutes to an hour before we landed, but once we landed we still had to wait for a bit before we could taxi to the gate, as the tornadoes screwed up scheduling for all flights of the day. By the time I got into the airport for my connecting flight to Hong Kong, I had missed the connecting flight by 3 hours. As it wasn't my fault they put me on the next available flight, which wasn't a direct flight. There's now an additional stop at San Francisco where I had to take a connecting flight there to Hong Kong. I was in no mood and no position to argue, so I simply nodded and went to the nearest bar to wait for the flight to SF. Nothing major occurred from DFW to SF and from SF to Hong Kong. Once at Hong Kong I knew I was merely 3 hours away from home by plane. When checking in for my flight from Hong Kong to Malaysia, I was told that I could not be allowed on board as my baggage couldn't be found. Could any airline staff explain this bit? I suspect it has to do with security concerns. They don't want you to be on a different plane than the one your baggage is on in case your suitcase contains a bomb, but I don't know, plenty of mad terrorists wouldn't mind going down with the plane. I was told that I had to wait until they'd located my luggage before I could be issued a boarding pass onto my connecting flight. After a 12-hour wait, they informed me that they had located my luggage. Due to the mix-up at DFW or SF, my luggage was mistakenly put on a plane that was bound for Paris. French authorities opened my suitcase and found nothing alarming, so they put it on the next flight to Malaysia, and I was allowed to take the connecting flight to Malaysia as well. Home. Now that I was in KL International Airport, I thought I'd just take the train from the International Arrivals Terminal to the main terminal, collect my luggage, and hop into my dad's car to get home, but nope, Murphy had more things in store for me. The aforementioned train connecting the two terminals broke down, and I had to wait an additional 2 hours for them to fix it. Also, when I made it to the main terminal to collect my baggage, I was told that my suitcase had not yet arrived from Paris. I had to go home and wait for the next morning for airport staff to deliver it to my house. So ends the story of my supposed to be 36-hour journey, but it got delayed to something close to 100 hours. Hope it entertains some of you. I was 19 at the time and went to a beer fest with my brother and his two friends. Let's call them Alan and Joe. Alan worked as a liquor rep and got us free entry, an illegal entry for me since it was 21 plus only. So, at this fest everyone gets a plastic cup with some boxes on it. If you want a beer it's 2 boxes checked, if you want a mixed drink, it's 4 boxes checked. This was done to prevent people driving drunk, however many of the liquor reps/salespeople were given stacks and stacks of cups. So, my brother took a liking to the bartender that was serving liquor for Alan's brand, and me being a timid 19-year-old didn't want to explore too much in a place I shouldn't have been in, decided to stick with them. We helped her bartend all night, mixing drinks for people and for ourselves of course. All the meanwhile Alan and Joe are getting super drunk and trying to take home these 2 girls there. So, the fest ends, and my brother and I are sober at this point, and we decide it's time to go. Remember those cups? Well, Alan had a box of them and was drinking all he wanted, and letting Joe do the same. They're drunk and so are these 2 girls they insist on taking with us in the car. So, my brother and I have to round up these 4 incoherent people to get them into the car. Well, Alan decided to squat outside the car and take a dump. It gets on the car, and I get it on me. I'm upset and irritated with their drunken behavior, but we push on. My brother is driving because he's the most sober and is desperately trying to get us home and get Joe and Alan to ditch these girls. Well, the girls blurt out, "Oh no, we're late for dinner, we have to go now," and the 4 drunk people strong-arm my brother into taking them to this restaurant, a very fancy restaurant. What we didn't know was that it was one of these girls' birthday, and we were 4 unexpected guests. We're not only underdressed for this restaurant, but we have 2 boorish drunk men still trying to get into these ladies' pants. My brother and I are making painfully awkward small talk with these people who know nothing about us or why we are here. We have to recount the whole story for them, and by now we are getting borderline kicked out of the restaurant. Alan is yelling at the waiter to get him another Bud Light, specifically in his flamingo koozie. The waiter is politely refusing to serve him, and he gets yelled at. By now the 2 girls from the fest are sobering up. Alan and Joe go to the bathroom and the birthday girl asks me who those 2 guys are and why they are here and why they are as such. She then sobs and cries in front of all her birthday guests. My brother and I notice Alan and Joe are in the bathroom a long time and decide now is the time to leave. We walk into the bathroom to collect our drunken idiots, and the bathroom is literally covered, every square inch, in paper towels. You couldn't see the floors or the walls. How they managed that in their state is beyond us. We drag them out and make our way to the car, which for some reason was parked at a car dealership's parking lot. We get 30 feet from the car and alarms start blaring along with a recorded message of "You are trespassing," and the police have been called. We scrambled to get in the car and drive home. It was incredibly frustrating at the time to deal with all of that, but it's one of the more strange and funny experiences I've had. In college, undergrad, we had a horrible physics professor. He never taught, just spent his 2-hour block class discussing his theories and research, but then he would make these insanely difficult tests on the material he was supposed to cover. Of course, his failure rate was terrible, as only the naturally physics-inclined people were passing while the rest of us were struggling. This was a physics class for science majors, so all of us knew basic high school physics, so the fact that most of us were struggling really underlines how little instruction we were receiving. Also, many of us, myself included, were enrolled in peer or instructor-led tutoring in an effort to salvage what we could. Anyway, one day he passes back yet another set of terrible tests and this football player in the front row just snapped. He picked up the test, tore it in half, threw the pieces at the professor and just started yelling about how this guy was a terrible professor, and how he was sick of working his butt off studying for the tests, having to guess what might be on them, only to come and have no chance whatsoever of passing. He then stood up, yelled, "I'm going to kill you," and took off running towards the professor, who just stood there with a shocked expression on his face. Before he, the student, could make it to the prof, 3 other football players took him down in a beautifully coordinated tackle, and then physically carried him out of the class telling him to calm down, "Bro, he isn't worth it, and drop and retake it, man." I went to a pretty rough HS, so I'd seen fights and stuff before, but I never dreamed I'd almost see a professor get jumped on a university level. Never saw the football player again, so I guess he did drop after all. The prof was fired after 1 semester because yes, he was that bad. Also, he lured girls, including myself, to his office under the guise of offering bonus work, but let's just say her bonus was more for him than us. I declined and he turned ugly fast. So yes, that happened. Sorry, this is so long I've been meaning to write it down for my family history. This Reddit post gave me another reason. Me and my wife, who at the time were pregnant with our son of 4 months, were doing a photo shoot with a photographer in 2014. This was at my wife's family ranch just outside of Fort Worth, Texas. We drove up to the highest point of the ranch on a hill where there were bluebonnets and cactuses to take photos. We had parked on the north side of the hill and walked over the top of the hill towards the bottom on the opposite side, the south side. We were dressed nicely, and my wife was all dolled up with high heels, which can be pretty immobilizing in Texas ranch land but make for a cool pic. As we were walking, we noticed some cattle off in the distance towards the east and a single cow alone just 100 yards from the herd. We weren't splitting the herd, just on some high ground a few hundred yards away. Asterisk, there was no cause for concern with the circumstances. My family has a large ranch and I've grown up around cattle, so I'm fully aware of when to be concerned. They were just grazing. We started to take pictures, and everything was going smoothly, and then I noticed that there were now 2 cows off in the distance. It appeared to be a baby, and then I noticed the placenta hanging out the back of the larger cow. At this point, the herd had shifted to the area of the mother. We recognized what had just happened, a birth, and decided to move to the other side of the hill out of view of the cattle and back closer towards my Jeep. So, the hill was splitting us between the cattle, and we were still on higher ground and closer to my Jeep. There was no cause for concern here either. Cows commonly give birth around ranchers, and sometimes we even help with the process. Cattle are also more afraid of you and will try to keep their distance if they're not sure of you. We had moved away from their sight and didn't split them from anything. So again, no cause for concern. We started taking pictures again, and about 5 minutes later noticed that the herd had gone from typical grazing and observing to quickly moving up the backside of the hill and were positioned about 40 yards away from us on the tip top of the hill. The Jeep, us, and them were now positioned like a triangle, one at each point. But now they were at an advantage because they were slightly higher on the hill. Any attempt of ours to get to the Jeep might appear as a move towards them, and definitely not in the opposite direction. The herd was probably numbering around 80 cattle and started bundling into a group, all looking directly at us. Asterisk, at this point I'm concerned. It's now clear that the herd has full intention to rid us from their area, and if we make a go for the Jeep, it could be seen as an aggressive move. I told the photographer and my wife to walk slowly towards the Jeep. Do not run, be calm. Then the photographer takes off running towards the Jeep, which is about 40 yards away and uphill, and jumps in the car and shuts the door. I'm like, WTF. As the photographer is running to the Jeep, I tell my wife to make a run for it, and she just says, "I can't, I'm in heels." My heart sinks. I look around and realize we are in the middle of a giant cactus patch with nowhere to go, and my pregnant wife is hopeless, and a herd of cattle look like they are about to stampede and trample us. Then I turn and look at the herd, and they've now positioned themselves closer to the Jeep uphill from us and 30 yards away. They start bunching into a tight group. It was horrific. It's obvious they're about to stampede and trample us. You probably couldn't push your hand in between all 80 of them, they were bunching so tight. All at once the calf, young cows, had moved to the back and the larger adults moved to the front. They then started to rock back and forth, almost as if they were gathering a collective courage to charge. They would do that for a couple seconds, then start looking like this was the time they were going to take off charging. Just before they would charge, I would start to roar loud like a lion or bear and hold my hands out wide. They would move forward a couple of feet, then stop and start the process all over again. This was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. No way you can survive. My wife, an unborn son, and me, no way. It was terrifying to see them strategically bunch and rock for momentum. Cows kill more people than sharks each year, and I'm sure this is how. If you had a gun, it wouldn't have mattered. A stampede is an absolutely terrifying way to die. I suffered some insomnia and nightmares after this, and I passionately believe it was from watching them bunch and rock, not from what happens next. So, I would roar, and they would stop. Then repeat. Each time they attempted to take it off, it looked like they actually would. At this point, I knew eventually they were going to charge and trample us to death. So, I started walking up the hill towards them in an attempt to separate me from my wife, in the hopes that they would trample me and consider the threat over with, then leave. As I started walking towards them, they all froze, not one bit of movement. All of the sudden, splitting from the back middle of the herd straight out of the front, came the bull running down the hill fast and straight at me with his head down, just like in the movies. Very large. I didn't see him prior. My thoughts were, I'm actually slightly relieved it's not a herd of 80, it's one is survivable, so now I should become a distraction to separate him from my wife. I did as only an ex-Texas college footballer knows, square him up and put your shoulder into him, football style. Literally, LOL. I had no clue what to do, so that's what I did. I charged him, LOL. I dropped my shoulder and met him head on about 15 to 20 feet away. I put my shoulder right in between his eyes. Right before we contacted, I remember his head seemed as big as Roman's shield from the movies and his face felt as hard as concrete. He stopped me dead in my tracks and threw me all the way backwards above my wife's head into the cactus pit. My body knocked down my wife as I flew. When I hit the bull, I crushed my shoulder and broke my ribs. My body felt absolutely crushed, and it actually was. And now I was rolling in a massive thick cactus patch. He wasn't done though. He immediately followed my flailing body into the cactus patch and started pouncing on me with his hoofs and pushing downward on my body with his head. I remember thinking, if he keeps pushing down on me with one more pound, I'm going to die from being crushed. I remember making an odd high-pitched squeak for a brief second. From all the pressure, it didn't sound healthy. His head moved left to right, adding to the pressure and pushing me deeper into the cactuses. He did that for a few seconds, throwing and smashing me around the cactus patch. Then all of a sudden he started to retreat to the herd. At this point I'm wondering if he's done, and I feel injured but not incapable of moving. I knew from experience through football that if you're injured, you get up and move around immediately to delay swelling or stiffness and almost ignore the injury, and it can buy you a minute or so. It's a silly trick, but it works, and in a tough situation it can save your life. I then look at the cow running back towards the herd and then at my wife, who was practically sitting on a cactus. I see this as an opportunity, as the cattle even seem a little shocked, thinking, is he going to get up? I see this as an opportunity. I get up, run, and grab my wife and throw her over my shoulder, which I didn't realize was broken at the time, and started hauling ass up the hill in cowboy boots. I get to the Jeep, swing the door open, and my wife says no, stop. I'm covered in cactus. I said, sorry babe, and tossed her ass in the Jeep. I ran around and jumped in my door. I start pulling 1 to 2 inch cactuses out of my hand so I can grab the steering wheel. My plan is to take us to the hospital to get her and the baby checked out and my body looked at. We drove straight to the hospital from the ranch, 30 minutes. By that point, the pain had definitely set in. I had broken my shoulder, tore my AC joint and broke some ribs, cactus needles everywhere. My wife went through her x-rays and everything was fine, the baby was fine as well. I was so grateful. It took about 1 month or so and I was back to moving around normal. I was pulling cacti out for a year. I pulled one out of the tip of my pinky 3 months later that was 1 inch long. No clue how I was moving my pinky, lol. However, the worst thing after that was the dreams. Every single night for probably 8 months I had very realistic dreams where I was in some sort of intensive conflict where I'm an underdog and should die but I wasn't. Examples: military ambush but I escape. Street gang execution but I escaped. I actually got used to the dreams and they were just a part of sleep. Crazy stuff. My wife and I have a beautiful healthy girl now named Shepherd, 2, and my son Wyatt, 4, is as healthy as can be. I've been meaning to write this down so I can have it for the family in the future. I guess this Reddit post gave me another reason to do it. Thanks. I was taking a firearms training course and about halfway through I had to take a massive stuff that took about half an hour, but when I was ready to wipe I realized that somebody left 10 squares on the roll, and they had no TP anywhere else in the bathroom. I even opened the door and waddled 6 feet to the cleaning lady's cart and all she had was a paper towel. Being super shy at the time I was too embarrassed to ask someone for help, so I wiped as much as I could with a paper towel and went back to class. I noticed everyone in the class kept looking at me and at one point was in an enclosed office with the instructor and his helper doing the second part of the exam. I didn't realize how bad I smelt until my dad came to pick me up and basically said that I smell odd. About 5 years later I started at a new company, and I was talking about firearms with one of the guys there. Eventually the question of where we did our training came up. Turns out he was in my class that day and recognized me. I tried to play it off, but I think he was pretending that he wasn't too sure if I was in the class or not. I was about 14 at the time of this story. Me and my mates used to play cricket at this Salvation Army building that was used for housing people who were unfortunately not wealthy enough to buy an actual house. It was a massive house, and there were always at least 2 families living there at any time, and it had a soccer pitch out the back that could be used for any sport really. We could go there any time because my mate was family friends with the people that lived there. Around the time this story starts, the building had been sold to the government and was going to be torn down. No one was living there, at least, no one was supposed to be living there, so me and one other mate figured we may as well play some cricket there, for old time's sake. We hadn't done it in ages. So, we were playing, when we hear a door open, and out of the door walks 2 people, a man and a woman. They are pretty old looking, and it's pretty clear they're doing some less than legal drugs. They sort of looked at us but didn't say anything. After seeing this, being the naive teens we were, me and my friends assumed that the building has become a crack den. A week passed, and we had told all our other mates at school about this crack den. A bunch of us decided to go down and explore inside it on the weekend. So, we made plans for 5 of us to meet there on the weekend and look inside. Now, we walked past this building every day on the way back from school, and we'd always yell stuff out when we walked past. Anyway, a week passes, and it's Saturday. Wielding cricket bats and heavy torches, we make our way slowly into the room. We are all scared and every slightest sound makes us turn around and sprint back to the door, as we had no idea whether they were home or not, hence the bats. But ever so slowly, we made our way through the spooky house. The power had been turned off, and the house stunk. Since there was also no running water, the toilets couldn't flush. There were 3 toilets in the house, and each was filled with a solid 6 months' worth of 2 humans' feces. The smell that came out of these toilets was indescribable. Just being within 10 meters of it made us want to throw up. As the day moved on, we decided it was time to check upstairs. The house had been more or less empty, save for some needles, condoms, a few knives, and some dish soap that we spilled all over the ground. Going upstairs was even scarier than coming into the house for the first time. We assumed that's where the inhabitants kept their stuff, and we also assumed that's where they would be hiding if anywhere. With our hearts in our throats, the 5 of us made our way upstairs. After what seemed like 20 minutes of climbing up, then sprinting back down, then climbing up, then sprinting back down, we finally made it to the top. We were right about some of the stuff they kept here. There was a giant machete, some bongs, more needles, condoms, and what appeared to be the couple's bed. We took photos and explored some more. The good part is coming, don't worry. Our fear was more or less gone now. We were sitting on the soccer pitch debating what to do next. I suggested going one more time, just to see if there was anything we missed upstairs. All but one of us went back in. The one who stayed outside couldn't be bothered. We found a window that overlooked the soccer pitch, and we were laughing at him looking like a loner outside. He picked up a bar of soap he found on the ground and started throwing it at us. It made a loud noise, and he did it multiple times. That's when it happens. From the other side of the fence, we hear a man's voice, "HOI. What are you doing?" My mate outside yells, "Guys, run, I'm telling you, I have never run so fast in my whole life. This isn't an exaggeration. The amount PF adrenaline shooting through me made me run at the speed of light. We zoomed down the stairs out to the main gate. It's about 2 meters high, and my friend was already on top of it, climbing over. I began to climb when I heard a massive crash. One of my other mates had run at the gate, attempted to jump on it, but snapped the metal bolt in the process, opening it. I didn't have time to process how funny this was at the time. We zoom out the gate, and I turn around and see the couple from a week ago chasing us, knives in hand, screaming and other verbal abuses. I then realized that the fact we had been taunting them all week had probably passed them off a bit. We safely got away from them, no one was hurt in any way. We ran all the way to McDonald's, and there we reveled in what had just happened. We realized weeks later how bloody lucky we were in so many cases. The fact they hadn't been home at all. The fact that my one mate had decided to stay down the final time. The fact that he had been throwing bloody soap at the window, which is what made them yell in the first place. If none of that had happened, if they had come inside and cornered us, we would have had to fight. We probably would have won. There were 5 of us and we're all pretty big, but still I don't think a knife and cricket bat fight would have gone down well. And that, dear Redditors, is my story. P.S. Extremely glad that it all played out the way it did, however. If it hadn't happened the way it did, this would be a lame-ass story. I stopped at a pond along a dirt road when I was riding my motorcycle late at night with a female friend. We sat by the pond tossing pebbles. It was absolutely quiet around there. We heard something rustling in the bushes on the far side of the pond. Maybe about 20 meters from us. She freaked out a little and I calmed her down by saying it was probably a deer or raccoon. She mentioned Bigfoot at this point. I laughed it off. The noise kept coming towards us around the pond. It went behind us and then around the pond to where it started again. It was definitely 2 legs at this point. You could tell it wasn't a deer or raccoon, etc. So, at this point I thought it was some teenagers messing with us. I called out and said to quit. The noise went around the pond and behind us again, even faster this time. It got back across the pond again and we heard some grunting of some sort. We sat quietly. It made about 2 more laps around even faster before it stopped again. There was no way a person could cover that ground that fast. When it became really quiet again, I told her we would run for the motorcycle, I'd jump on and start it, and she'd hop on it after it started. We ran to the bike, and the noise came at us. I revealed that Honda 700 Interceptor and ran it down that gravel road faster than I thought I should have. To this day, I'm convinced that it was a Bigfoot around that pond. Central Ohio for those curious about the location. Near Dawes Arboretum. Years ago, my Polish grandfather, living in the UK, got a phone call from one of his brothers, a member of the Soviet government, asking if he could urgently come over and stay as he needed to leave the country. My grandfather, wanting to protect his family in the UK from something potentially dangerous, said no. A few weeks later he discovered that his brother had been killed, most likely by the Soviets. We don't know anything else other than this information, and it makes me really curious as to what went on. When I tell people this story they don't always believe me, which is frustrating. I have related stories about my grandfather's side of the family as some of his Polish and Russian family were quite prominent in their countries, TV presenters, government officials, etc. 5 years ago was the most insane year of my entire life, without any exaggeration. Summer of 2007, I just graduated from uni. A month later my mom was diagnosed with terminal stomach cancer. Doctors gave her 5 months. Our family shut down the family business and me, my brother and dad camped out at my parents' place to take care of mom. A couple of weeks later I went back to my apartment to get a change of clothes and check in with my then live-in girlfriend of 2 years only to find that she was sleeping with another man in my bed. I couldn't cope with it, so I literally packed a suitcase and got the F out of Dodge. No goodbye, no nothing. 2 months later I found out that while I was at uni, my brother had picked up a pretty bad heroin addiction and my mother's diagnosis had pushed him over the edge to the point where I wouldn't see him for days. I eventually locked him in a room and forced detox after agreeing that it would be the only way to get him clean to at least say goodbye to mom sober. He kicked it and has been off heroin since. Doctors pumped my mom full of so many drugs, which had more side effects than benefits, that my brother and I made the decision to take her off most of the meds and went the alternative route, i.e., medical marijuana. Mom had never smoked before and was pretty scared. She was an immigrant from Asia and being of that generation looked at weed in the same light as heroin, ironically. So, we all smoked together as a family, and from that day until the day she died, she didn't want anything else for pain, physical, emotional, and psychological, than cannabis. Truly a miracle plant, IMHO. Mom spent her last days in a hospice, and we all camped out in a single room for 2 months. Her neighbor was an older guy by the name of Frank who used to be a short order cook. He was dying of lung cancer and me and my bro would sneak him out for cigarettes. We figured that he was there to die, so why not give him some pleasure while he could still enjoy it? One day while shooting the stuff with Frank, I learned that he used to work for the parents of an old ex while I was taking care of mom, but a girl I dated for 4 years pre-unit days and who was really close with my mom. When I wheeled him back to his room, he asked me to turn on the cassette tape player, which was provided to him by the hospice staff. That tape player turned out to be the exact one she gave to me for her birthday years ago and I gave away to a thrift store after we broke up and I moved out. The tape that Franks had been listening to during his stay was a mixtape I made for her that she left there years ago. Suffice it to say I broke down and cried my eyes out, which given the context, didn't really alarm anyone. I collected myself and I called the ex that night, and not having spoken to her in years, I told her what was going on and asked her if she wanted to come say goodbye to my mother. She did. After my mom passed, my brother and I went back to open the family business, only to learn that the community trust, who were our landlords, had made a deal with a huge franchise to open up a directly competing business literally next door and had served us an eviction notice while we were in the hospital. To add insult to injury, they claimed that because we were in arrears for rent, they claimed that they would be taking ownership of all stock and equipment as collateral. Keep in mind we had to shut down shop for 2 months to watch our mother die. That night we rented a moving truck and called a few friends to help load as much stuff as we humanly could and never looked back. There's a part 2 to this story that takes place a year later, but I don't know if I have the emotional capacity to relive it now. Perhaps if anyone is interested, and once I've taken a pause I'll retell that chapter. This is crazier coincidental. So, I finished school back in 2004 when I was 16, it's common to finish at that age in the UK, and there was this one classmate I always remember for being overly charismatic. I didn't really know that well and we weren't really friends per se, but we did share a few classes together. After we finished school for good he just dropped off the face of the earth and I never thought I'd see him again. Fast forward to 2012 and I'm at college studying acting where I end up working with this guy who's about 6 years younger than me. We got to know each other quite well and ended up becoming best mates. Then one day in 2015 I saw my old classmate's name pop up on social media, saying that he knew my best mates and they also shared the same last name. It's a common last name so I didn't think anything of it. After asking my best mate about it, it turns out that my old classmate is also my best mate's older brother. Since then, I've met up with him a few times and I currently share a flat/apartment with his younger brother/my best mate. I'm also good friends with the rest of his family too. But if someone had told me in 2004 that all this would happen, I'd never have believed it. I used to live on a dead-end road. Many people would come down that road because they thought it would lead out to the main highway. It looks like it does on any map of the area. But the landowner fenced across the dirt road that used to cut across his land. Many drunks thought it would be useful to get to the bar located on the main highway without taking the chance for getting pulled over for DUI. So, when folks come flying down the road, they have to stop and turn around in my driveway. Well, I had a sign down there that said, "Did you bring a present?" One day a big pickup truck drove down and stopped in my driveway. I happened to be looking out the window and saw a large man exit the vehicle and wave his arms in the air, sort of thrusting his fist towards the sky in frustration. He then rummaged around in the truck for a moment and placed a small plastic bag next to the driveway, turned around and drove off. I thought to myself, oh no, he's dumped his trash, put on my coat and went down to pick it up. When I got down there, underneath the "Did you bring a present" sign was a full 6-pack of beer. In November of 2017, my grandfather and uncle were murdered by my grandfather's crazy wife. When I was a kid, my friends and I were ignorant and would make fun of her for being crazy, not knowing how dangerous she really was. We'll call her P. I called my grandfather about 50 times when he missed my brother's birthday. I just knew something was wrong. P contacted me saying that my grandfather was out of town and that he would contact me when he got home. Then she proceeded to talk on the phone with me for almost 45 minutes. I decided to give her the benefit of the doubt, denying the little voice in the back of my head that urged me to call the sheriff's office for a wellness check. 2 days later, I phoned the sheriff in the morning because I'd had enough. 5 minutes later I got a call back saying that the house was engulfed in flames, and the only body recovered was P, who doused her car in gasoline, climbed in the front seat and closed the door. She apparently planned to set her car on fire but couldn't manage to do it after she shot herself in the chest with a handgun. Most of the house burned down before the fire was put out, but my grandfather and uncle were found with bullets in the back of their heads, badly decomposed, wrapped in carpets in the basement cellar. They had been dead for weeks. A week later, the police sent me scans of the suicide note that P wrote. It was 40 pages long, chicken scratch cursive written on a lined notebook pad. She talked about how my grandfather was in love with another woman and a bunch of horrific things about my mother. She talked in great detail about how she would spy on my mother as a teenager while she lay in her bedroom naked taking pictures of herself with a Polaroid camera, and how she would steal the Polaroids and keep them. P was only 6 years older than my mom. She also talked about how she suffocated her firstborn child, my aunt, and told the doctor it was sleeping syndrome, SIDS. They never performed an autopsy on the child, and she was immediately cremated. She was also 2 at the time. P wrote that she cried too much and that she was ugly. She even wrote something about me, but I'm not going to share that. Ever since then, I've done so well in school, but I feel like I can't connect with other human beings like I used to. Once you experience tragedy, it changes the way you think. It's always on your mind. And you can't help but wonder if there are other crazy people in your life, like P. Happened to me when I was young, maybe 10 to 11 years old. Me and my family, mom, dad, aunt, and cousin, if I remember correctly, went to a very remote beachside community in the northeast coast of Brazil called Natal. Now, this is a tourist spot to some degree, but it is mostly extremely poor fishing communities with little access to education. I remember there being an aquarium in one of these villages that was like the main attraction. I saw some animals there I've never seen again, like this frog-like thing with gills, a large spiky tail, and a single horn. If anyone knows what this thing is, please tell me. They had an anaconda display that was empty because the aquarium's neighbor had to kill the unfortunate thing after it escaped more than 8 times into his yard. I say all of this to paint a picture of how remote this place was. No roads mostly, just 1 or 2 here and there, and we mostly got around by dune buggy. Anyway, one day we hire a guide as part of a small group to take us snorkeling at this lake inside a cave. It's a local attraction of sorts, we were told, because the cave is gigantic, as is the lake. And I really mean gigantic. The cave was as tall as a cathedral, and you couldn't see the far end, it just turned to inky darkness. You could see inside the cave at all because the opening was exceptionally large, and certain parts of the wall had caved in to make a sort of natural window. The inside of the cave was mostly a giant lake, big enough to have islands if that helps paint the picture better. And big enough that you couldn't see the far end as it went into the cave. The water was clear, and I mean that. If it weren't for the ripples you'd almost think there was no water, just a large fall to the ground. It must have been over 100 feet deep at its shallowest point. There was no gradual decline, it was more like an enormous pit filled with water. I can't imagine how deep it got further in the cave. Now, as a kid I was already imagining all sorts of things that could live in that cave. I mean, as a Brazilian growing up traveling around certain parts of the country, I knew anacondas liked to swim and liked caves. So, I was kind of freaked out, but we were in a group, and I didn't want to be the scaredy cat, so I went in the water. As we were swimming, I became distinctly aware of how you really can't see the far end of the lake at all as it melts into the darkness of the cave. And from that darkness, at irregular intervals, the weirdest groan/shriek you've ever heard would rise up. I tell myself it must have been waves, and cave groans and wind and things like that. But that's what I tell myself. That didn't sound right, but it well sounded like it was alive. And it terrified me, but at this point we were already pretty far from the shore, and I wasn't about to swim back alone. So, we kept swimming. Since the water is clear, you can see all the way to the floor, 100 plus ft below. It's pretty amazing actually, until I realized that the floor was not in fact covered in interesting white stones. It was covered in bones. Hundreds, thousands of them. I could make out bull skulls, and sheep carcasses and things like that, and of course I couldn't tell because of how many there were, but I'm sure I saw some human-looking skulls in there. It was almost impossible to tell though, because of the sheer quantity of bones that literally covered the entire floor as far as I could see. And they were all perfectly white, no meat or debris that I could see. At this point I essentially started panicking. I just felt the whole scenario was really wrong. Now my mom doesn't like talking about this much, which I find weird, but I'm fairly sure she was really freaked out too, because she grabbed my hand and tugged at the guide and motioned for us to turn back. He didn't question it, just turned around and we swam back. It was the longest, slowest, most terrifying swim of my life. I was shaking when we got out. I tried to act cool, but my mom could tell I was shaken to my core. And I was in fact, to this day I have an utter fascination for water monsters and creatures, but also a pretty severe phobia of dark, deep water called thalassophobia, which is common, but I really feel it. Doesn't even need to be dark, deep already does it if I can't see the entirety of the body of water clearly to confirm nothing is in it. I'm not saying I believe in water monsters like Nessie or things like that. All I know is that I don't know what was in that cave, if anything, or what's in the water, and while part of me would like to know, I'm never going anywhere near that place, or any deep, dark body of water, ever again. When I was 18, I was hanging out with a friend. At 8 p.m. we decided to hit the snow cone place. Tell his mom we will be back in 30. Decide to go to Baseball Diamond, our college, see if any friends are there. Run into a girl that is having a party after. Go to party. After a few hours of drinking, I walk into the host's bedroom and girl 1 is on top of girl 2. Both topless. They yell to shut the door. I ask in or out, figuring it would be gotten out. I was wrong. Make my way to bed and join. Girl 2's pants come off. I'm 2 fingers in. Girl 1 leaves. Alright, not important, can still make some magic. Girl 1 returns with girl 3. They take turns coping with feelings and make the comment, I'm ready. Ick for what, but yes, let's do it. Ima gives them the best 37 seconds of their life. Eat a sandwich and go again. Well, remember my friend. He comes in and lays at the foot of the bed. Won't leave. They all look at me expectantly, so I start jackhammer kicking him in the ribs and shoulder. Man won't leave. Says he can't get too drunk. Girls 2 and 3 say they don't want an audience and leave. Douchebag gets up and follows them out. Mad drunk. Lay down on floor, pass out by couch around 2 a.m. Buddy's phone rings at 5 a.m. I hear his mom screaming, "Where are you two?" I was backpacking around China with some friends and outside a fruit market in Chengdu came across a friendly orange cat meowing and weaving around my legs. Now, being the animal lover that I am, plus having one of my own back homes, I couldn't help but bend down and pet the kitty who kept loudly crying. The cat suddenly reached up with 2 paws like she wanted to be held, so I obliged by scooping it up gently and cradling its hind legs while holding to my body gently. The cat stopped crying, but all of a sudden I felt some wetness slide down my arm that was supporting the cat's, but then I thought, that's weird, the cat better not have peed on me. Looked down and saw a bunch of blood and a tiny cat fetus, no hair, barely formed the size of my index finger, plop out onto my shorts and then onto the ground with the bloody placenta still attached. I started panicking and put down the cat and examined the tiny thing that was moving and flailing its tiny paws around but not making noise. The orange cat started pacing around but then slipped off into the market, so I'm left standing over a dying kitten with blood streaks going down my arm and pants. The local fruit market vendors either didn't even bat an eye, but one woman felt bad for me and gave me a small plastic bag to pick up the kitten with and bury it in the park a block away as it had stopped breathing and moving. So yes, a cat had a miscarriage with me while I was picking her up. I was 15, ditched classes and was smoking weed for the first time in my life with some friends. We were hanging about under an overpass that links up to a park with lots of trees and shrubbery. At some point, I lost my friends when I went to pee, and somehow ended up hanging out with another group of people who were drunk and high. This was a time where mobile phones were a common thing yet, so I couldn't call my friends. I didn't know any of these guys, but they were cool and friendly. I ended up much more intoxicated than I originally planned and found myself cruising around in their cars. They were like 10 years older than I was, listening to rap, drinking and smoking, even cuddling up to a cute girl and just generally having an enjoyable time. In my weird haze of being high and drunk, they stopped for fuel, and everyone got out while I kicked back in the 2-door Integra. I vaguely remember someone putting on a mask, and thought they were just moving around being quirky. They returned to the car, floored it, and returned to the smoke spot. I don't remember how I managed to get home in the end, but in a sudden moment of clarity, I realized they had just performed a robbery when I saw cigarettes and money were being distributed between them. They even gave me a 50 note and 2 packs of cigarettes. I got really paranoid and kind of in shock, so I pretended to act as cool as I could, and said my mother needed me home. Shook everyone's hands, and peace out. I still don't know how any of this went down, as the sequence of events still feels like a dream to me. A friend of mine was house-sitting her way across France a few years ago. Unfortunately, while she was staying at this place just outside Paris, the owner's dog died of natural causes. She rang the owner up, sadly informed them of the news, and asked what they'd like her to do. They told her to take the dog to their vet. The only problem was that she didn't have a vehicle and the vet was about 30 minutes away by public transport. So, she packs the dead dog up into a suitcase. As you do. It's pretty heavy trying to lug it around, but there's not much else she can do. Eventually she gets off the train at the station near the vet to find there aren't any elevators or escalators. She's in a bit of a pickle about how she's going to get the dead dog up the 3 flights upstairs. Before she can think too much about it, a gentleman notices her pause, and generously asks if can assist her with the suitcase. She gladly accepts his offer. He motors up the stairs making the suitcase with the dead dog look like a feather. As the gentleman reaches the top of the staircase he takes off with the suitcase and disappears into the crowd. My friend was speechless. One evening my little dog decided he wanted to go out on the balcony, 2nd floor. I assumed he wanted some air or to bark at some people walking by, so I went out with him. He immediately trots over behind the barbecue and starts growling. I think to myself, well, this can't be good, so I walk over to move the barbecue to grab the dog, but as soon as I lay my hand on the barbecue a claw comes bursting through the cover and tears my fingertip open. I look down and there's a raccoon but poking out underneath the barbecue cover. Now profusely leaking from my finger I grab the dog, go inside, and proceed to scare the living hell out of my wife and newborn. Ended up with some stitches and a lot of rabies vaccines. I think I got something like 8 needles into my fingertip the next day. That was the most excruciating pain I've ever experienced. Also, 2 days later the raccoon is back sleeping in the corner of my balcony. We got animal control to come take him away. Lessons learned, don't fight raccoons. I already shared this one, but here it goes again. Also, fair warning, this can be gross. How gross? I left a tool at the bottom so you can judge. Ahem. Back in my middle school years, there was this kid in the classroom, going to call him Neil. Neil had a terrible attention span, and was an expert procrastinator. Teachers would aisle him from anything other than his books and a single pencil so he could catch up in homework. As he would never do anything in his house, his parents never cared about him. So, one day I was assigned to the off-hours classroom with Neil to catch up on homework. For a week I took off. Neil tried to talk to me, but the teacher instructed me to ignore Neil at all costs, and by instructed I mean threatened me with downing my grades if I did otherwise. So there was I, ignoring Neil's attempts at chit-chat, and when he understood it he started to act obnoxious, saying how I wasn't a hotshot and how I was pretending to be too good to talk to him. Past the first half hour Neil asked for my thermos as he was dying from thirst. I saw no harm in it, it was almost empty anyway. Boy was I wrong. See, Neil was wearing one of those jackets that had a wool string to adjust the hoodie, and he has been chewing it in an attempt to procrastinate. So what did he do when he realizes my thermos was empty? He squeezed the string on it, pouring a generous amount of saliva in it. I was too busy with my homework to realize what horrible experiment was happening next to me. Meanwhile Neil with his newfound superpower started to chew his string again, and every time he felt it too moist he squeezed it again in the thermos. He repeated this process for like an hour, until he started to chew the string loudly enough for me to shut him up, and that's when I saw it. My thermos, that was almost empty last time I saw it, was now overflowing with a viscous clear solution that was certainly not water. Horrified I asked Neil if that was what I thought it was. Neil replied, "Yep man, got bored, no." Somehow this man manages to fill a 1.5 L thermos with his saliva. OFC I called the teacher, OFC he got expelled, OFC he got appointed with the psychologist, and OFC I never used that thermos ever again. My grandpa was at the Battle of the Bulge. He was a medic who hadn't touched a rifle since basic and he was going to be a replacement for a medic lost on the front lines. His commanding officer handed him a rifle and told him to sleep in the cab of the truck because he probably wasn't going to sleep much after they met their new unit in the morning. He woke up to clear skies and American planes filling the sky end to end. Patton's army broke through and the skies had cleared for support. His commanding officer promptly took the rifle from my grandpa and told him to go back to bed. Never got cold, never fired a shot. He didn't tell many other stories of WW2. He later became a Green Beret and served in Vietnam. He got lucky again during Korea and stationed him in Thailand. A friend of mine told me he ate mushrooms before driving to a rave, and all that happened was the grass looking greener as he drove there. Years later some friends told me they had really strong mushrooms that they could make mushroom tea with. They acted like I was barely going to handle it, but I rolled my eyes and thought, ooh, colors will be brighter. I was sitting in their living room feeling kind of weird but not having visuals. Suddenly, when I looked up, the living room was the size of a coliseum. My friend's GF was across the room, and she looked like Persian royalty, ruling over the coliseum. I'd never even been high before, so I couldn't handle it. At one point I laid on their bed with a black light on while the glows ticked, standing over me. I honestly thought he was a giant deity, and I was floating in outer space. It was too much, and I panicked because I didn't believe I'd ever come down. I was too far gone. I swore I'd never make mushrooms again, but I actually did them many times. I learned to have a kids' movie ready if I was spiraling toward a bad trip. I'm a pizza delivery driver and I once delivered to a bachelorette party and was asked to strip for $50. I said no and was super embarrassed, but once I got to the party they started screaming, "Here's our stripper," and began to chant strip. I was the most embarrassed in my life and didn't want to do it, but a girl came up behind me and took my shirt off of me and began throwing it around so I couldn't get it. This happened back in August and my shop still teases me about it, saying stuff like, if I was there I would have made $100, but in the moment I was dying of embarrassment, especially since it was on a ton of girls' Snapchat stories. It's kind of funny. If the roles were reversed it would probably make the news. My boyfriend and I were out hunting in a pretty remote area in Oregon. We were walking around and heard some rustling and branches breaking in the trees below us, so we crouched down and waited for the creature to come out. I see a large black figure meandering out of the woods and my heart starts racing. It's a black bear and we are maybe 100 yards away. It's moving very, very slowly towards us. My boyfriend gets his bow ready. I have my hand on my oh shit handgun. He stands up and starts cracking up. It's cow. Like, a moo cow. We have a good chuckle, make fun of me for a bit, ease up, and turn around to leave. There is actually a black bear behind us. It was a bit further away on the hillside and it was full on speed running across the field past us like he got the "my parents aren't home" text from his girlfriend. It was the one and only bear we saw that entire trip and to this day the only one I've ever seen in the wild. We still can't believe it actually happened. The timing was movie sequel, and it sounds embellished when we try to retell it, but it is completely true.
Thanks for watching. Please comment, like, share and subscribe. The Internet Surfer on YouTube for more horror and scary stories.